Hello friends, it's been almost 4 years since Sony bought Bungie, and at this point it looks like the deal has not exactly gone the way Sony hoped. Sony paid around $3.6 billion for Bungie, and obviously they had some pretty big expectations attached to that price tag. They were expecting strong Destiny revenue, big things from Marathon, live service expertise, and also useful technology, talent retention, and future games that would help justify that investment. But now, according to Sony's latest financial results, Bungie and all the related studio assets are estimated to be worth only about $2.8 billion. And that's an $800 million hit right there. Now, to be clear, this doesn't mean Sony just woke up one morning and lost $800 million in cash. It basically means Sony now thinks it paid too much for Bungie, and the value of that acquisition had to be adjusted downward. Which brings us straight back to Marathon, as Bungie already made it clear that they're putting Destiny 2 on the back burner. The game hasn't been a complete disaster, but it clearly hasn't delivered the kind of results Sony and Bungie were probably hoping for. Right now, Marathon is sitting at around 15,000 players on Steam, which is technically higher than Destiny 2, but still nowhere near the kind of numbers you would want from a major new live service shooter, especially when you compare it to something like Arc Raiders from Embark Studios, for example. And the worrying part is that the number seems to be trending down, not up. So Bungie still has a lot of things to figure out, and they has to figure it out fast. But honestly, none of this is that surprising. Over the last few years, Sony has been pushing really hard into live service games. We had Concord, now Marathon, and we haven't even fully gotten into things like Horizon Hunters Gathering yet. And look, being a live service game doesn't automatically mean a game is bad. We've seen plenty of great games come out of nowhere with live service elements. But when it feels like a studio is thinking about monetization first and the actual gameplay second, that's usually when things start to fall apart. So if Sony is really worried about the bottom line, I think they need to take a serious look at what kinds of games they're making. Because with the studios and talent Sony has, they absolutely can make a lot of money. But they need to put the game first, not the business model. Speaking of disappointing launches, the release of Civilization 7 was rough. Like really rough. And weirdly enough, Strauss Zelnick, the CEO of Take-Two Interactive, seems to agree. In fact, he basically says he takes full responsibility for it. Civilization 7 was developed by Firaxis, which is owned by Take-Two, and it launched on February 10th, 2025. And this was supposed to be the next huge step for the franchise. New systems, reworked mechanics, improved visuals, and a bunch of other major changes that were supposed to move Civilization forward. The problem is a lot of players just didn't like those changes, and that hit the game pretty hard. Reviews were mixed, player numbers dropped, and sales didn't seem to hit the level people expected. Even after multiple patches, Civilization 7 is still sitting on mixed reviews with only a little over 5,000 players online. For comparison, Civilization 6 still has around 40,000 players, and Civilization 5 has around 15,000. So yeah, that tells you quite a lot. Speaking with GameFile, Zelnick said that every time Firaxis makes a new Civilization game, the team has to walk a really fine line. They need to push the series forward enough to make people want to buy the new game, but they also need to preserve enough of what people already love so they don't alienate longtime fans. And with Civilization 7, he admitted they got that balance wrong. He said that it wasn't because they didn't try, but he still takes responsibility for it. He also said that despite all the reception, the game is still profitable. Which honestly a little surprising, but hey, good for them. And I do think it's pretty admirable that he is willing to say, yeah, we got this wrong. Because as someone who likes Civilization, I completely get why people bounced off this one. I didn't really connect with a lot of changes to the core gameplay either. And even though I'm a fan of the franchise, I just haven't been able to get myself into this one. Now, I don't think the game is a total failure, but I do think it failed to be a worthy successor. And to be clear, I'm not saying franchises should never innovate. You can't just keep releasing the same exact game for 35 years and expect people to stay excited forever. But Civilization has a certain identity and players have their expectations. And when you start changing fundamental parts of a game like that, it's always a gamble. This time, it just didn't pay off. Hopefully though, it becomes a useful lesson for Civilization 8. 007 First Light isn't even out yet, and IO Interactive is already talking about the possibility of a sequel. But of course that depends on how the first game performs. In a recent interview with the game business, IO Interactive CEO said that both IO and Amazon are extremely excited about the upcoming Bond game. And since Amazon now has control of the Bond IP, they obviously want to make sure anything attached to it is actually good. Apparently, once Amazon saw the game and got hands-on with it, they became huge supporters of 007 First Light, which is an extremely good sign, but both sides want to see how the game lands first. They want to know whether players actually love it, whether a community forms around it, and whether there is enough interest to justify another game. And honestly, that makes sense. You don't want to commit to a whole franchise before you know if the first game works. But if First Light does well, the CEO basically said, why not make a second one? So far, this game looks really strong on paper. The gameplay looks promising, the story angle seems interesting, and James Bond is still one of the most recognizable IPs in the world. Strangely enough, I don't really remember Bond ever getting a truly major AAA level game, so the odds are definitely in its favor right now. Personally, I do think this could be commercially successful, but there are still some big risks. First, we haven't actually played the game yet. We've seen bits and pieces of gameplay, but until people get their hands on, we don't really know how good it feels. And with a game like this, pretty good might not be good enough. It needs to feel polished and it needs to win people over quickly. Then there is the business side. How many copies does IO need to sell for Amazon to consider it a success? Does it need to sell a few million copies? A few 100 million? Does it need to become a massive cultural phenomenon? That stuff can vary a lot depending on expectations behind the scenes. And I really hope nobody expects this thing to perform like GTA or even Hitman right out of the gate. But to be clear, I think 007 First Light could absolutely sell a few million copies in its first few months. But it might also be more of a slow burn. And if Amazon and IO are okay with that, then yeah, we might actually get a sequel. After promising to turn things around, Build a Rocket Boy is laying people off again. MindsEye recently got a big content update called Blacklisted, but it doesn't look like the update did much to stabilize the game. The company hasn't officially announced the layoffs, but according to Kotaku, around 170 people were let go recently. That reportedly brings the studio down to about 80 employees. A lot of affected developers have been posting on LinkedIn and Discord, saying their goodbyes and reflecting on their time at Build a Rocket Boy. And honestly, it's hard to be surprised by this. The Blacklisted update didn't really move the needle. At least according to Steam charts, it barely did anything for the concurrent player count. So now the studio's future looks even more uncertain. A comeback story similar to Cyberpunk or No Man's Sky is pretty much out of the question, and an imminent shutdown is starting to feel more and more possible. To turn a game around, a studio usually needs a few things. They need enough developers to actually fix and improve the game, they need enough players still around to notice those improvements, and they need enough trust from the community for people to give the game another chance. Right now, Build a Rocket Boy seems to have lost all three. They've just lost a massive chunk of their staff, fewer than 20 people are regularly playing MindsEye, and after losing IO Interactive as a publishing partner, plus the whole bizarre situation about the launch sabotage, the studio's credibility isn't worth anything. Honestly, I don't know how they can come back from this. At this point, it might be better for them to sell whatever assets they can, regroup, and maybe start fresh with a new studio, a new project, and a very different mindset. Or at the very least, very different leadership. Because I think they passed the point of no return when their co-CEO started throwing accusations around, while the game itself looked like, well, this. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised it took this long, but Unity has finally launched a beta version of its own AI assistant. And according to Unity's official announcement, the goal is to help developers build better games faster. The AI is designed to work like an in-project assistant that understands the context of your Unity project and helps with Unity-specific workflows. And in the trailer, Unity showed off some pretty impressive stuff. They created a game prototype using prompts, including building an arena from existing assets, adding a player-controlled vehicle using a reference, adding weapons, creating shooting scripts, and adjusting the skybox. Unity also says that by default user data is supposed to provide the service but not used to train AI models, and the assistant should already be available for Unity 6 and above. Now, as I said multiple times before, I'm getting a little tired of every software company trying to shove AI into everything. Don't get me wrong, the trailer does make a decent case for it. Especially for solo developers or people making side projects, this could be genuinely useful. But game development is complicated. Even a basic game has a lot of moving parts, and AI tools still lose context, misunderstand instructions, or confidently create things that don't actually work. So I'm pretty skeptical about how useful this assistant will be in real production. And for bigger studios, privacy is going to be a major concern. I highly doubt a lot of professional developers are going to rush into this, unless Unity is extremely clear about data handling, ownership, and security. And honestly, part of me thinks this is just a clever marketing move. Unity took a huge reputational hit after the whole runtime fee controversy, even though that fee was eventually reversed. So this feels like a way to say, hey, don't leave Unity, look at us, we're building this flashy new tech for you. And maybe it works, but it's definitely a gamble. If this assistant makes Unity 6 easier to start with, easier to maintain and easier to iterate in, then great. That could become a real reason for developers to stick with Unity. But if it is inaccurate, expensive, or unclear about rights and data, then it could become one more reason for developers to look at other engines. And with how annoyed a lot of people already are about AI, I'm not sure this is going to win Unity as many points as they hope. But hey, what do you think? Would you actually use an AI agent like this for game development? Also, quick thing. If you don't know who I am, my name is Alex, I'm a game producer and I'm here to help you get caught up on everything that's going on in the video game industry. Could Ubisoft bring XDefiant back? That's the question some fans are still asking after the shooter was shut down. For anyone who missed it, XDefiant was a Ubisoft's free-to-play first-person shooter that launched in May 2024 with Mark Rubin leading the project. And at first it looked like it had real potential. Ubisoft said the game had more than 10 million players in its first 2 weeks, which is a massive start for a new IP. But unfortunately, the game could not hold on to that momentum. The player base dropped quickly, and Ubisoft announced in December 2024 that they would be sunsetting the game, with the full shutdown happening in early 2025. That whole situation seems to hit Mark Rubin pretty hard, and he ended up leaving the industry altogether. Fast forward to now, and one fan asked on X whether Ubisoft could ever bring XDefiant back. And surprisingly, Rubin responded. He said that he misses the game just as much as the fans do, and he also said Ubisoft could bring it back if they wanted to. But from what he can tell, the company has a lot of things going on right now, and is mainly focused on staying afloat. And that is a pretty spot-on assessment. Ubisoft is still dealing with restructuring, so I really doubt they're going to pour resources into reviving a game that would need a ton of work. Because bringing XDefiant back wouldn't just mean turning the servers on again. That's the easy part. The hard part would be fixing the problems that hurt the game in the first place. Stuff like player retention, content cadence, monetization, and stuff related to shooters in particular, like competitive identity, anti-cheat, and probably a bunch of other stuff behind the scenes. Those are not tiny fixes. Those are the core pieces of a live service multiplayer shooter. And if Ubisoft couldn't solve those problems while the game was still alive, I'm not sure why they would be able to solve them now that the game is officially dead. So as much as some fans would love to see XDefiant return, I don't think it's likely. The best thing Ubisoft can probably do is treat the game as a learning experience. Figure out what worked, what didn't, and then use those lessons on whatever comes next. But for now, I wouldn't expect XDefiant to come back anytime soon. And that's all I have for you guys today. Let me know, what do you think about Marathon? Do you think Civilization 7 is beyond salvation at this point? And what are your thoughts on the Unity's new AI bot? As usual, if you want to know more, all links are down below. And of course, clicking the like button helps this channel a lot, and I personally highly appreciate it. Thank you for making it this far. And with that, Alex is signing off for today. Cheers!